Hello and welcome to Perspectives, where we take a deep dive into the issues of the day and where we take a look at people's opinion on such issues. I am Ruth Osime.
And I am Olatorera Majekodunmi-Oniru. Today's topic is bereavement. How do spouses handle the death of their lifetime partner? We have very important discussions and special guests coming up, so please stay tuned.
Losing a spouse is devastating and requires one of the most significant life adjustments you would ever have to make. You may feel numb, shocked, and fearful. You may feel guilty for being the one who is still alive. At some point, you may even feel angry at your spouse for leaving you. All of these feelings are normal. A common theme amongst people who have lost their spouse is the debilitating effects of feeling entirely alone and incomplete. The world suddenly looks like a different place and often odd and distanced. Some people keep re-experiencing the circumstances or events around their partner's death. Others find themselves sticking to old routines they did while their spouse was alive. It is especially important to get help with your loss if you feel overwhelmed or very depressed by it. Family and compassionate friends can be a great support too. Feel free to share stories about the one that is gone. But as time passes, even though you may still miss your spouse, for most people, the intense pain will lessen, but it's normal to feel emotionally involved with the deceased for many years. There will be good and bad days. You will know you are feeling better when there are more bad days than good.
Very well said. Suddenly, your flesh of flesh, your backbone, your heartbeat, your ride or die, your forever love is gone. Death is never easy on anyone. Many times we mourn strangers, but when it happens to the man or woman you vowed to love till death do us part, how do you move on? Some widows said, life became meaningless. One said, I felt so ruined and began to count down to my own fateful end. Some other widows said, strength became a necessity. One said, I had to be so strong for my children and my other dependents. I bounced back from grief in no time. I had to. No one can tell another how to grieve or the ideal time frame of grief. Level of grief depends on the depth and strength of love. Widows who were truly deeply in love and cannot fathom life alone experience the most excruciating turmoil. Widows who served as caretaker for their spouse all through final moments and those who have been widowed before may bounce back quicker. And widows who did not genuinely love their spouse and may have caused, planned, or contributed to the demise rarely grieve deeply or genuinely. Certain developed countries provide bereavement support and death-related benefits to struggling widows. In Nigeria, many widows go through hefty emotional and financial pain in addition to the existence of extreme poverty. It is important to have good friends, family, and people who you can depend on to limit turbulent tears and convert your grief into a celebration of life and more life to come. Intense discussions coming up shortly, but let's watch the special report. Perspectives will be right back.
The loss of a spouse is something no one prepares for, no matter the age or time of their death. Bereavement and spousal loss leads to emotional and practical problems, especially for those in failing health. Research on the experience of bereavement has been applied in fields such as psychology, philosophy, and art, where grief and loss are examined in ways to enable bereaved persons to search for meaning after the loss of a loved one. Spousal loss has been described as among the most stressful of all life events, especially for older adults. The psychological adjustment to widowhood varies widely based on characteristics of the marriage, the nature of the death, among other factors. The effects the loss of a spouse does not only affect adults, it takes a toll on the children too. The young ones are faced with the harsh reality of living without a father or mother figure. Dealing with the children's grief can be a lot. Making them understand their parent is not coming back can be hard to explain. there is also the burden of raising the children alone when you lose a spouse, especially when combining work and keeping up with the family duties. Today on Perspectives, we will be taking a look at how to deal with spousal bereavement, how to handle and answer the plethora of questions from children who are struggling with the reality of losing a parent, among other things.
Being widowed is one of the most horrifying experiences ever. But we can't just focus on just widows. There are also widowers who have also lost their spouses. And I know I haven't lost a spouse, but I've lost a sibling. And from that alone, I know what my family and I went through. And I just hope that there will be opportunities or there are avenues where they can find solace of some sort whilst they're going through their pain and anguish. And I can understand why they feel alone. I can understand why they feel isolated. I can understand why they don't think anybody can understand the space in which they're in now.
It's a very devastating occurrence, especially when they're dependent on their spouse. And it goes either way, man or woman. When the love is so strong and you lose anyone in general, it's devastating. But someone that you've shared your life with for a decade, 2 decades, for just many years, and you've become dependent on that person, it's even worse when the person leaves abruptly. And like the image we saw before we started discussing, it just showed a lot of women poverty-stricken, just looking like they just needed that person to help them. And I think that's the situation that a lot of widows in Nigeria are facing. It's like that umbrella above you, that shadow, that support system has been pulled from underneath you or on top of you. And it's like, where do we start from?
But it applies to widowers too. Because in fact, that's why widowers tend to marry faster. Because that woman that was in the house was the umbrella, was the support system, was the tree that held all the branches together. So you find that they can barely cope being on their own. Widows tend to cope more with the loss of their spouse than widowers, because really it's the woman, if it's a perfect marriage or an ideal marriage, it's the woman that holds all the units and components of that marriage together, you know. And I know that for a long time, when I lost my brother, which I cannot use, I mean, pain is pain. I'm not saying one is better than the other, one is worse than the other. Was he older? No, he was younger. He was immediately after me. So we were 4. He died at 36, 35.
That's quite young.
I was 36 at the time. No, he died at 34. I was 35 at the time. He was quite young. He died in a car accident, and his was sudden. And I remembered part of the things I used to think. You know, when you lose a loved one, you start to, your thoughts, you get a bit morbid with your thoughts. And I used to think, okay, is it better that he would have died, he should have died through an illness where, you know, I was expecting it, rather than just a sudden death. Do you understand? Because sudden death too has its own traumatic effect, because you weren't expecting it, it just suddenly happened.
Right.
Whereas when the person has been ill for a long time, you sort of, I mean, you hope it doesn't happen, but you're sort of a bit more mentally, emotionally prepared for the loss of that person.
Right, especially when there's like division of labor there, and you know, you had children, the spouse did this certain task, you did the certain task, and you just feel that gap, that major
That's why I said
the roles, the responsibilities, even when you're just going through their belongings and you're just seeing things and just discovering things.
Even that belongings thing, you wonder, pain. You wonder, when did they now start giving out the things? Because some people will tell you they still have not been able to enter the room of the deceased. They cannot bring themselves to start giving out those things, or
what to do with them.
So some of them apparently can leave the room like that for years.
It brings us back so many memories. Was your brother single?
No, he was married. He was in a car accident with his wife and 2 kids, but they survived.
Oh wow!
And the first kid was about 3, and the second one was 1.5.
Oh.
So he was the only one that didn't survive it. But
how many years ago?
Victor died 1999.
That's a long while.
It's a long time.
Did she remarry?
No, she didn't remarry. I don't think she has ever really fully
she raised
recovered.
The kids by
so she raised the kids, but she was very good with raising the kids and what have you. But I know that for a long time, especially my mom, because it was the only boy that we had. So it was a long time. We couldn't really.
It was tough.
Even now and again, I still.
It sounds tough.
Yes, it is very tough. Not to come and talk of when is a spouse, which I'm saying. All death is painful. You can't say, oh, mine is more painful than yours because it's a spouse, or yours is more painful than mine because it's my father. Death is death.
Absolutely.
You know? And I think from my experience, I've learned what not to say when I go and see people who have lost their loved ones, which I'm going to discuss with them when they come on. Because there are just certain things that you say that's, it's infuriating. Oh, time heals. Oh, don't worry, you will overcome. I mean, I don't want to hear that at that point in time.
Exactly. No one can tell anyone how to grieve.
Exactly.
That's the truth. I remember a time that I couldn't reach my husband. He was abroad. And I panicked because I had done some certain steps, called the airport, called this, called that. And I couldn't reach him. And this panic just like engulfed me. I was almost like, traumatized. So just that, how it affected me emotionally, mentally, physically. I cannot imagine if something were to happen to him. I mean,
exactly.
Spousal death is
it's one of the most painful. It is extreme, especially if the person died young. Or especially if the marriage was relatively young.
Right.
Nobody's saying there's any right time for death.
We're just starting.
But it is a painful, and you have to, like you said, you have to appreciate how the person chooses to mourn.
Yeah.
It's not for you to say, oh, how come he's doing this shortly after his wife died, or how come she's doing this shortly after her husband died. One of the guests that's coming in today will tell you what when she did certain things and was also judged for it. And she was like, look, you can't wear my shoes.
People do judge. People do expect to see a certain amount of grief.
Exactly. You can't wear my shoes.
You can't
how I grieve is my business, and you have to respect that because you're not wearing my shoes. You cannot suffer what I'm suffering.
Although there are those cases whereby the spouse may have caused that death. Maybe the love wasn't as strong, and so
how spouse must cause the death? How?
When people plan the deaths of their spouses.
Oh, okay, murder.
Happen,
oh,
right?
okay, well.
Or you use somebody else to plan it.
That's another angle
those ones you can say,
in fact, you'll be surprised. Quite a few people might have killed their spouses, and nobody's aware.
And they won't grieve.
Anyway, we are heading for a short break. You'll stay with us when we return. We will have here with us Pastor Ituah Ighodalo and Banke Sotimi as we delve deeper into today's topic. Perspectives will return in just a moment.
Welcome back to Perspectives here on Arise News. Moving on to introducing our guest. First off is Banke Sotimi. Banke is a transformational leadership and executive coach with extensive experience as a qualified commercial lawyer with over 20 years of corporate experience. She's a certified life and executive coach by the Life Coaches Association of Nigeria and a member of the International Coaching Federation and European Mentoring and Coaching Council. Banke provides both consultative services and coaching services across various industries and sectors, some of which include government, banking and finance, oil and gas, retail, education, and technology. Banke is a widow and also a mother of 2 boys. Warm welcome. I'm glad to have you on Perspectives today, Banke.
Also with us on the show today is
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Welcome, Banke. Also with us on the show today is Pastor Ituah Ighodalo, an associate at the Nigerian Institute of Management 1992 and the American Institute of Management 1993. He's a fellow of both the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria 1994 and the Nigerian Institute of Taxation 2000. In 1987, he founded Ighodalo & Co., which merged with 3 other firms to form SIAO Professional Practice 2004. As former managing partner, now deputy chairman, Ituah has over 40 years experience in professional practice. He also chairs and sits on the boards of several companies, amongst which are FAMAD PLC, Falcon Corporation Limited, UT Insurance Brokers, Trust Microfinance Bank, Elizabeth R. Events Limited, amongst others. Pastor Ituah Ighodalo is also a pastor and founder of Trinity House, Lagos. He's the publisher, editor-in-chief of Timeless Newspapers and Publishing Group. Blessed with 2 children, his beautiful wife, Ibidun, passed on in June 2020. Welcome to Perspectives.
Welcome.
My darling pastor. Fine boy, no people. They hail you. Anyway, we all know what you went through when you lost Ibidun. It was a very painful experience, even for us that knew her personally. Now, but the kids were relatively young when Ibidun passed on. And with young kids, it's very difficult to cope with grief. And it's hard for them to fully comprehend what has happened. So how did you start the conversation with them to get them to express this grief and also be involved in the process of their mother's funeral?
Well, the day she passed, after I finished what I needed to do, they were at home, so I came back home and I called both of them and I explained to them that their mother had passed.
But your son was like about 1.5 or something
Was
at the time.
2.5. He didn't quite get it. He says, "What did I mean?" That I said, "Well, your mom's gone to heaven, and she's not coming back."
How old was the other child?
She was 8.
So old enough to understand.
She understood straight away. She broke down and started to cry, and I gave her a hug, and I just held them. To be honest, they also gave me strength. And from that day, our lives changed completely. And we've become a little bit dependent on each other. Even today, part of why I came almost a bit late was my son. He said I shouldn't go anywhere. Yesterday he followed me to the vigil because he just wanted to be around me. Maybe he finds me a safe space.
So was he more clingy to you
He's
when
now more
his
clingy.
mom died?
Yeah, he's now
but there was
more
something that happened on the day of a business death, which obviously got a lot of tongues wagging. I'm sure you know what I want to ask you.
Go ahead.
And it was the fact that apparently you were at a funeral service of somebody who had lost her son. And during the service, apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, apparently during the service was when you heard of this demise. And you continued with the service. And a lot of people couldn't comprehend how that was possible and misread, rightly or wrongly, why you needed to still continue even if after hearing such devastating news. So can you sort of clear the air as in what your state of mind was like at the time you heard the news and why you chose to proceed, even with that knowledge?
I spoke to my wife at 9 p.m. on Saturday. She sent me a text at 11. Also sent a text to Ituah at 11:20. And at 2 a.m. on Sunday, 2 a.m., I got a phone call from one of her staff that she had passed in Port Harcourt at 2 a.m.
Okay.
On
So it wasn't during the funeral service
Wasn't during
as
the funeral
perceived?
service as perceived.
Okay, so it's
That's
good that
the
you
first
cleared
thing.
here on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went to the funeral after.
I went, 2 a.m., I got the call. I told them to send me the photograph. They sent me the photograph.
Wow.
And I saw that it was her and she was lifeless. And then I began to think, what do I do? She was
Because your service was the next morning.
I had the church service at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And I had told Biola, it was her son that died,
Yeah, I know.
that I would
Be there.
conduct her son's funeral. As a matter of fact, they changed the time because of me. She wanted to do the funeral at about 11. I said, not on a Sunday, not 11. It's not possible. Do this funeral at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. And she agreed. And so I got this news and I looked up to the skies and I said, what do I do? You know,
Wow.
I needed to, what do I do? What do I do? And it was as though I had the Lord giving me specific instructions. My first request was, should I go to Port Harcourt? It was during COVID.
I remember.
There were no flights. Do I go to Port Harcourt and carry my wife and bring her back? Or what do I do? And I heard before you get to Port Harcourt, you will die. If
Wow.
you try to make that drive. Not that you'd have an accident, but the
There's some
trauma,
risks.
The trauma, yes.
the anxiety,
Mental state of
the
mind.
tension. So tell them to bring her back. So I called the boy. I said, bring my wife back now. Whatever you need, just do it. So they got the governor. He gave them some escorts. They did this, they did that. And by 5:30 or 6 a.m., they were on their way back. Then I said, so...
Needless to say, you didn't sleep at all.
No sleep.
What were some of the moments where you missed your wife the most? I think it's probably been about 3 years, thereabouts.
Every day I miss her.
Right, but in terms of raising the children by yourself, what were some of those moments that you just wished?
I think it was when I had to employ a house girl or nanny for my children. One of the nannies was leaving, so I needed to replace a nanny. And I found myself interviewing nannies.
I'm sure things that you've never done before.
Never, ever.
Okay.
You know, never, ever. My daughter graduated on Tuesday. And I just remember that we're from primary school.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
I had no idea how she got to that school.
Oh, wow.
All I know was that this is the school. That's where
Your wife
she's
did all the
going.
planning.
Exactly.
This is the school bill.
So you're now father and mother.
That's what my daughter calls
Anyway,
me.
let's bring Banke in, because like you, she too has also lost a spouse. So Banke, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone.
Hello Banke, how are you? Nice to put a face to the name. I wanted to ask you, what was the hardest part about losing your spouse, especially in your case? Because you lost your spouse relatively young into your marriage. How did you find the strength? Just tell us how you have found the strength to carry on, and how your kids have coped with the loss so far.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one of the things for me has been heavily relying on God. And I feel like it's a bit of a contradiction, because when I first heard about my husband passing away, I felt so much disappointment, so much fear, so much anger. And I remember saying to God, why me? Like, how could you do this? And I remember feeling extreme anger towards God. But then towards, as the grief started to really sink in even more, I had a conversation with God, and I said, come, God, look, I'm angry with you right now, but I also know I cannot go on without you. And so for me, one of the biggest things that I've been able to really navigate through the difficulties of grief has been my reliance on just knowing that God is the one that has to give me that strength. In terms of my children coping, so my children were from a previous relationship, and so they were much older. One was 18 at the time. My youngest one was about 8 or thereabouts. And, so explaining to them what had happened wasn't necessarily the challenge, because they understood what death meant. But I think it was such a heartbreak for all of my family, because they had assimilated my husband as, one complete unit. And I think because I was one of the last people to finally get married in my family, it just felt like such a fairy tale gone wrong. And so it has been a constant growth period, just overcoming grief. It's been also trying to find the joy of life again in my own personal life, in my own personal world, stepping back into a place of acceptance that, this is how life has turned out.
Okay.
But then I remember praying to God and said, okay, God, this there must be purpose in this pain.
Exactly.
And so for me, it's been really about navigating through the pain and getting purpose.
We're going to go on a break now, and we'll continue from where you left off. So do not leave us. Share this beautiful moment with us, and maybe you might learn one or two things about growing spiritually. We'll be right back. I was telling you during the break that there's a question I want to ask you. PI. But before I ask you that question, I remembered there was a music band, popular band, I won't call names, whose wife died about 2 or 3 years ago when they traveled abroad to perform somewhere. So that was me, sat at a party with another widowed friend of mine, and the guy was walking towards us. I was like, hey, this guy lost his wife. I was telling my friend, can you imagine, he lost his wife when they went to whatever. Came to greet us. I was like, so sorry about it. He said, I'm getting remarried. I almost fell off my chair.
How long apart was this?
Maybe about 2 years.
Okay.
I said, you're getting remarried, okay? And my tone was so accusatory, which really, like we were saying earlier on, it's not for us to judge how soon somebody wants to marry or somebody should remarry.
You were shocked, you didn't expect it.
I mean, I was shocked. And I think I even embarrassed him a bit from my expression of shock. But later on, I thought to myself, he's a widower. He's probably found it so difficult. And I just thought, you know what? I need a helpmate that will come back. So what I want to ask is that, is society allowed to judge how soon you can remarry or not remarry? And besides, if a widower marries 2 or 3 years within his wife's marriage, is it really out of character? Is that a big deal?
I think 2 years is sufficient time to grieve and to allow the air to be clear.
Yes.
But I've known people who've married in 6 months.
No way.
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean 6 months? 6 months as soon as she died?
Yeah, 6 months. Not once, not twice.
But on that note, what are your plans
What are my plans?
Remarry?
To remarry. It's a difficult one for me. Extremely difficult. First of all, my head is not in that space.
I suspected not.
Oh, wow.
But now that you say your head is not in that space, we are women. You're a fine man. Cool, calm, collected, together, spiritually strong. Money safe, they hand, the whole package. Tick, 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 tick.
Seemingly.
My co-host is sick.
No, it's my brother, it's my brother. So I tell you
Seemingly
what a
not,
lot
it's
of it's my brother. That's why I can say it now. If I was campaigning, would I be saying this? Do you understand? So my question is, how have you been able to form it? Not necessarily turn back any form of advances or what have you, but how have you been able to create a space where you make sure certain boundaries are not crossed? Because like you just said, you're not mentally ready for marriage or courtship or what have you. You're not in the 6 months category. Do you understand? So how have you been able to, make sure, because there's certain overtures that women will make, even though they think is not obvious, that will be pretty obvious. So how have you been able to
Wade of advances?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe not use the word wade, but you're a pastor now, so you can't.
Pastor.
So how
over
have you
to
been able to diplomatically?
I'm coping. I'm coping. I've been long in this game.
Yes. Exactly. I've forgotten.
You must remember that
Ituah,
I've been
those
long
days.
in
That's
this,
true.
in this
That's
game.
true.
And
So
I was a bachelor for a long time.
you can't play a player.
So I wouldn't say I'm used to it, but I know the game. And I'm very clear in my thoughts. Okay. Even when I was married, I would not be in the same space with any lady who is.
Yeah, but that's why you are married. Now you are
but even now,
Yeah.
I still am not in the same space.
with any lady who is not what?
I mean,
No, that's
with
why he
any
was
lady.
married. He didn't want to be in the same space with any lady that would make the lines blur.
just by myself.
Yes.
You understand? I'm always either with my PA or my SA or my chief of staff, or they come to the house where my maids and everybody are, counseling, discuss, whatever it is.
But do you ever see yourself remarrying? Maybe a couple of years from now.
It's not possible to say never, but if I have my way, I'm happy, I'm okay, I'm calm.
No, because
my life is not complicated, it's a simple life. I'm looking after my children. I'm doing well.
Yeah, but you might need companionship. Maybe it's still too raw to be telling you that. But
maybe when the children are a bit older, so on and so forth. My daughter has warned me.
She has warned you that was.
I shouldn't marry.
So is there a mother
she's
figure?
young now. Okay, she's young.
Is there a mother figure you've brought into their lives?
Not really, but
someone very caring.
I've been
Maybe relatives.
I've been lucky, privileged.
Yes.
They have about 4 women in their lives.
Okay.
That's good.
My mother-in-law, their grandmother. She's very much in their lives.
Okay.
My brother's wife, Ifeanyiwa.
Okay.
She's playing a phenomenal
I thought about
role.
Ifeanyiwa when she asked that question.
Okay.
My sister, Tolu Alokwe.
Okay.
She's playing a good role.
Yeah.
And then the fourth?
And then the fourth is Dami. Dami used to be Bidon's PA.
Oh,
and
how
she just
sweet of her.
continued that role.
Is she
She's
single? No. I like him like single.
Not speaking for pastor today.
She's single, but she's my daughter. She's a good friend's daughter.
Dami, I'm sorry. I know you love him.
I brought her home.
No, the reason I asked was that because I was wondering whether she was married with her own kids. And if that was the case, young kids, she might not have as much time to see your kids.
I've been asking her to go and get married. I'm sure she will get married soon.
By God's grace.
By God's grace.
But we need to bring Banke in. Banke, lady in purple, goes with your hair. When we were talking the other day, I was saying to you that there were certain things that when I lost my brother, I found irritating that people used to say. And not that they mean any harm. So what were the kind of things that people said to you at the time that really upset you, even though they meant well? At the time of your loss. And first, you were married to your husband for a very short while. Can you let us know how long you were married for? Because I know it was quite relatively short.
Yeah, so I was one of the late bloomers, if you like, in the married world. So I got married relatively late in terms of society standards, and I was married for about 8 months before my husband passed away. And I think just listening to the conversation that's been happening so far, I think one of the main issues about people's responses and reactions to grief is this notion of how people should grieve, when people should grieve, I do believe that no one really has the right to legislate on how that grief process goes. So, we've just been speaking about how soon is it to start another relationship. I mean, I feel like that is definitely something that is very subjective, is very relative to the individuals. Of course, there is necessity for a significant period of time to be had to ensure that you've moved through the grief and you've personally healed.
Absolutely.
But I think it's really important that when we...
Sorry to... Are you
no,
done?
go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, you remember I asked you first question initially?
Yes.
So what were the things people said to you that used to really upset you?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so much what they said. I think it was just the fact that I was not ready to receive it, because they didn't necessarily say anything that was bad. Things like, it is well, be of good cheer, God will give you another husband. It's all coming from a well-meaning place, but I was not a capacity or container to receive that. And so for me, one of the things that I did do very early on in my grief stage was I separated myself, because I found like those words were not helping me, they were not supporting me, they were not soothing me. But I also didn't have the courage to say to them, this isn't helping, stop saying it to me. So what I actually did, I just removed myself from the visitations. They would come and pay visit to my mum and pass on messages. And my mum knew very early on, certain things not to pass on to me, because she just knew they wouldn't be well received. So I think things like, it is well, time heals, God will give you another husband, God will give you another, those things sometimes can really do more damage than actually provide soothing comfort.
Banke, thank you for sharing that. You mentioned that your children were from a different spouse, but I want to understand how you handled spousal belongings. What did you do to the pictures, the assets that were your late husband's?
So pictures, it took a while for me to go back into actually looking at. So with our wedding pictures for a long time, I actually just had them in a folder that I just never looked at until a few years ago. In terms of the material things, I had to leave our marital home relatively soon after he passed away. So I had no choice but to actually move some of those things. And what I did, which I think would have been very much what he would have wanted, was I donated a lot of his items, clothing items, to charity, those who were in need. And obviously kept a lot of the possessions that were of sentimental value. And yeah, that was basically what I did with that in that regards.
When Olatore just asked you about his belongings. Now, had you been the one that had passed away, would you have wanted your spouse to remarry? And in that case, what do you think? Do you think he would have wanted you to also remarry? Is this something that you've ever considered? Or it's still too soon to even begin? Because we asked Pastor Ituah the same question. He's not ready. Are you at that place where you think that you might be ready to find love again?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think for me, I'm in a space of happiness, and I think that's a really important message to really get across, that even whilst dealing with grief and moving through grief, if you allow yourself the opportunity to move through the acceptance and tap into the strength that God gives you, you can find peace, you can find completeness, you can find wholeness. Now, does that mean I'll never get married again? I don't want another relationship. Just a bit like what Pastor has said, you can never really say never. But in this space and time that I'm in, I do feel very much supported and held. I feel at peace within myself. I do not feel incomplete. To answer your question about, would I want my spouse to remarry? I feel like everyone deserves the opportunity to love. And if at that stage where he feels he has moved through healthily and wholesomely the loss, I don't think it's wrong for him to move on. Likewise, I don't think it would be wrong for me to move on. I think what's more important is, have you gone through the healing process so that if you do move on to a new relationship, you are coming as a whole person and not as a broken person who still needs to be healed, who still needs a lot of support and comfort. So I think that's my take on the whole remarriage thing.
Okay.
I don't think you can legislate that. I think everyone is entitled to love. Yeah.
Okay, speaking of recovering, like we all agree that people have their different processes and different lengths of time to recover. It's not us to judge how soon or how long it should take. But in your children's situation, like you just mentioned, that your little son hugs you more, you know. So how, in your bid to keep the memory of your loved one alive for the children, what can you do to encourage them to talk about their loss? And also, some children get very anxious. Especially your son who was young, he might be anxious that you two might go to heaven, which is probably why he hugs you. So there are some children who have not been able to cope with the loss of a loved one, and sometimes the spouse that is alive doesn't know how to handle it. So if need be, do you think sometimes you can seek professional help for counseling?
Sure. I mean, people who do need it, and everybody needs it, we all have different thresholds. There's nothing wrong in seeking professional help and guidance. There's also nothing wrong in looking at what the Bible says and what the spiritual guidance for this is. And people have done that. People have volunteered advice here and there. Senior pastors, younger pastors, people who think they know about these things. And I listen and I cope and I take the ones that are useful and I leave the ones that are not relevant.
But do you consciously make an effort to keep her memory alive? I mean, do you still have a picture in the house? Do you watch videos with her in it? I mean, what kind of things do you do to...
If you come to my house, it's as though my wife is still living there.
Oh, wow.
Hey, wow.
That's a tough one.
That's a message to the woman.
quite a
Hey,
tough
no
one.
chance.
Yeah,
Those
the
are tough on
pictures
you.
are all over the place.
That's
Wow.
very interesting.
The first thing you see in my house
Are you
is my
serious?
wife's picture.
That's
You'll come one
interesting.
day.
But that leads me to my next question, though. So how, and I'm assuming you probably haven't bothered with this, but how do you handle joint accounts, wills? All the legal documentations, have you removed her name? I mean, you've not removed her picture, so you probably haven't. But
Well, we didn't have a joint account. Or maybe we did. She operated it. I can't
But you
remember.
still run the business, though. You
I
still run
her
Elizabeth
business.
business.
I
Okay.
run her business. I run her foundation.
Okay.
We talk about my wife almost every day. You know, even yesterday, my son was asking me, "Is she going to come back?" You know, that was very
wow.
touching.
So it hasn't really
She's still
fully
alive.
digested
Right.
to
Well,
him.
he knows she's gone.
Just
You
if
know,
it was on
the
a
issue
long
is why
holiday.
did she have to go? That's my daughter's question. Then he asked just yesterday that his mommy going to come back.
Oh, wow.
And I said, not physically, you know, but she's still very much around us.
I wonder, did they dream about her?
I think my daughter has dreamt a couple of times.
And she told you?
And she told me, yeah, I can't remember what she said, but she's dreamt a couple of times.
But does this make you overprotective of them? Because now you're a father and mother.
Indeed, indeed. You know, one of the most hurtful things, talking about what was hurtful when your wife died, was my niece innocently said to me, she's taking the children away. I said, don't you dare.
Oh, away from you.
Away from me, so that I could be alone. I said, don't you dare. She saw my eyes flashing. I said, leave them. They and
I'm raising them.
we're in this together.
But
Don't take them for 1 second.
But were there things you discovered about them that you didn't know when Ibidun was alive? That you started to notice about them?
No, we raised them together. The children were very close to me, even when she was alive. You know, whenever I came back from work in those days, she would virtually throw them at me. And I had to start looking after them and so on and so forth, you know. She insisted that I took them to school, you know, although
So
then...
you were hands-on dad.
Yeah, I was very
Thank God.
hands-on.
Because some men who have been to your shoes are not.
I was hands-on.
That's another reason why they thought of probably marry earlier.
Yeah,
Because they
you
can't
see,
cope.
when your wife dies or when your spouse goes, you are disorientated.
I can imagine.
You know, there's some things you don't know that people did and so on and so forth. I've told you about interviewing nannies. I've told you about the children's school. I was never involved in all those kind of things. That was her area, you know. All she did was give me a short list, and then I'll say, okay, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you go for this? She did everything
This is a real...
in terms of their hospitals. I had to find out about their vaccinations, you know, and so on. But fortunately for me, she kept records, okay? So there were files and records everywhere. And Dami was very, very helpful at that time.
That's your niece?
No, Dami, my
Ibidun's
her
niece.
PA.
Okay, I mean, the records help.
She knew quite a few of those things. So I had to catch up very quickly with those
Playing the
things.
motherly role.
Being
And so on
updated.
and so forth. Yeah. So
Thank you for that feedback. We're going to go on a quick break, and we'll be right back with Perspectives on Arise TV. Welcome back to Perspectives on Arise TV. We want to go into the healing process. Pastor, can you tell us what helped you heal and recover the most? We know you are very close to God, and helping people is something you do genuinely. So we know you had lots of people around you. What were those moments that helped you heal and move on faster?
well, healing is not immediate. First of all, you have to give it time. It's not something you can really rush. All I know is that it gets a bit better on a daily basis. The first thing is to accept what has happened.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people find it difficult to accept it. A lot of people beat themselves over the head. Why me? Banke said so. Why should this happen to me? Maybe my spirituality helped me to know that this has happened. It has happened. It is not why me. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. It has happened. So in fact, one of the reasons why I kept moving was so that nobody will come and start feeling sorry for me. That's why I got up and I did what I needed to do that day. I went to church, preached my sermon, finished my sermon, went to see my mother-in-law, consoled her, went to the funeral, preached the funeral, and then went home. It's like, move on.
Yeah, but
it has happened.
It was probably easier for you to do that because you were in a very strong space spiritually. You're almost like a father figure
maybe.
to your brethren in church. So the way you would have handled it probably might not be the way any other person who is not as spiritually strong would handle it.
Well, most people are not able to because you fall into pieces.
Yes.
You know, first of all, death is very devastating.
Yes. It is.
And the finality of it is so wrenching that you really...
Especially
really
when it's sudden.
Yeah, when it's sudden. When I spoke to her at 9 o'clock.
Oh my God.
I spoke to her.
And she was okay. She didn't say anything was paining her.
Laughing, teasing me.
Oh my goodness.
You know, she said my car broke down. She took my car to Port Harcourt. Said my car broke down on the way. I owe her 150,000. I must pay her. Blah, blah. We're just cracking jokes and laughing.
Nothing.
Nothing.
So
Nothing.
what caused the...
It was a sudden heart attack, I'm told.
Oh, wow.
And you know she was a very hard worker.
Very
maybe
hard
she was
worker.
putting too many things at the same time.
together, yeah.
Well, speaking of which, let's get Banke in because I'd like to hear how... Banke, are you here with us? Now, how would you...
I'm right here.
How would you describe your healing process and what purpose did you achieve in doing this? Have you been able to create a canvas for your life today? Because I remembered you were telling me how you found solace in music. And tell me what happened. Somebody reacted to you dancing or something. So tell us, was that part of your healing process and how was it? How has it been so far?
Yeah, so embodiment practice has always been a part of my life. So embodiment is the notion of using your body to move through energy, move through stuck emotions. And I remember on one occasion, there was a recent song that came out at the time, which really kind of helped me to move through that difficult, heavy emotion. And I posted a picture of myself or a video of myself dancing to that particular song on my Instagram. And I received quite a few backlash actually, because I was quite transparent in my journey on my social media. And so people were aware of my loss. And I remember receiving a particular DM that asked me, you know, did you really love your husband? Isn't it too soon to be dancing? And I had to explain to her that dancing for me was a way of moving through energy that I couldn't express, emotions that I couldn't quite articulate. And, you know, when I was able to explain to her some of the psychology behind that, she then appreciated that, okay, everyone has their own way of dealing with grief. You know, just like what Pastor has talked about, his was just accept it and move on, keep going. For me, I needed a little bit more than that before I got to that stage of, okay, here I am, I'm accepted. And I think it's also to be aware that there are different stages of grief. You know, so in one case, you might be moving through anger. In another case, it might be denial. It might be the bargaining stage. It might be a sense of guilt. I personally felt a lot of guilt because I was away at the time when he passed away, and I felt like if I had been around, he would have taken his medication. He might not have had that, you know, sudden heart attack. You know, there were so many things. So there are so many ways, so many emotions you go through there isn't one particular way to heal from it or to deal with it, and it's what you find easy expression that you should be allowed to move through. And for me, dancing was one of those expressions that allowed me to
your case was
cope with the
particularly
grief at the time.
Okay. Your case was particularly worse because I know you said that even from when you married him, you knew he had heart problems. But he was just about to get a heart transplant or something along those lines.
Yeah, so when I got married, that's when I became aware of the health conditions.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And he was due to have it wasn't a heart transplant, it was just a heart surgery to put a pacer inside his heart, which meant if his heart stops, it will be able to reactivate itself, obviously. And he was due that surgery literally less than 2 months before he passed away. And I remember at the time trying to encourage him to stay in the UK. He said no, he wanted to fly back to Lagos. So we went back to Lagos, but I had to go back to the UK very urgently the week that he died. And I remember flying out that day feeling so sad. I don't want to leave, but my spirit couldn't quite understand why I had such an emotional reaction to it. And then within the week, on my way flying back into Lagos, that's when I heard he passed away. And so that's where sometimes the guilt comes in, that if I had stayed, he would have taken his medication. Even if he had a relapse, I would have known what to do, because at the time when he had the episode, no one knew of his condition, no one knew what to do. And so by the time support was granted to him, it was too late for him.
Okay. Banke, how long did you say you were married for?
8 months.
So I was married for about 8 months.
8 months.
It was a beautiful wedding, and we had just kind of started getting into the groove of married life. And funny enough, I also spoke to him that same morning. He was absolutely fine. We spoke about 11 a.m. and we had a practice of keeping in contact with each other. And I realized that, hold on, I haven't spoken to him in quite a few hours. I called. And then I kind of started getting a bit worried. And then I got the call from the PA to say this was what had happened. And so that was basically how the whole entire episode came about.
Thank you so much, Banke, for being with us today. And we can only pray that God will continue to give you the strength to overcome your loss. And hopefully one day, maybe you'll find love again. It's not impossible. Thank you so much for being with us. Pastor, maybe I should come and apply. We come from the same town. Maybe that sister matter. Maybe I should come and apply. Maybe you can make a decent woman out of me.
So all the compliments.
Yes,
fine boy.
Yes.
He's
Fine
rich,
boy, no
he's
people,
this,
is
everything.
everything. Chassis.
Cha.
In fact, before any woman comes to you, she has to come and meet me for application. Let me somehow out first. But anyway, jokes aside, we know what you've been through. We appreciate what you've been through. Thank you so much for sharing this very personal moment with us. And
Absolutely.
we hope that those who have worn the same shoes or wearing the same shoes at this point in time will get some succor from what you had to say and what Banke has to say. And may Ibudu's beautiful soul continue to rest in peace. And our love to your children too. Thank you so much for being with us in Perspective.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for what you all are doing. And may the Lord comfort us all and give us strength.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Anyway, after all said and done, you have gone from being a husband, wife, or partner to a widow or widower. Your loss may take away your energy, appetite, and emotional reserves. But having your family, friends, or a community of others who have also experienced grief allows you to feel that someone else gets it. Being able to share your story or your feelings is vital to the healing process. As time passes, you will regain your energy and your hope for the future, as distant or as unreachable as that may feel. And always remember, no matter what you go through, life continues to be a learning curve. And that's all we have time for today. You've been watching Perspectives here on Arise News with me, Ruth Osime.
And with me, Olatorera Majekodunmi-Oniru. To every widow, recent and past, wishing you strength on earth to bounce back after grief and avoid being further deprived by your loss. To everyone else, I hope we practice more of giving every loved one all the love we can while they are alive, hale and hearty. Help those around you to live a full, meaningful and wealthy life that will be celebrated after death. The key to a better world today is humanity. Our world needs a much stronger dosage of healthy love, care, and compassion. Thank you for watching Perspectives. Thank you to our special guests for joining us today. Have a great weekend and see you all very soon. Goodbye.